Your blood runs orange and blue. This is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Shout out to the Denver Nuggets, but when is it going to be our turn? EJ Stewart, Tommy Beer, Orange and Blue Bloods, and New York Knicks podcast coming at you right now. Plenty to get to on this episode. We will be talking about the capper of the NBA Finals, the Denver Nuggets winning the title, beating the Miami Heat in Game 5. We'll talk about the Nuggets win, how they were able to capture this championship, and how much of a threat they are to repeat. We also got some early odds for next season's NBA championship, and we'll give you guys the odds on where the Knicks lie right now in terms of the odds to win the 2024 NBA championship. I was a little surprised at how low they were, but we'll talk about that. Also on the show, again, as I said in the last podcast, there'll be plenty of episodes where we're talking about players that aren't on the Knicks, and here we are again. So should Bradley Beal be a target for the Knicks this offseason? At least one Knicks commentator thinks so. So we'll talk about whether Bradley Beal will be a good fit in New York. Plus the news that's been kind of breaking today. Yes, as we record on Wednesday, even more so, even on Tuesday, both Shams and Brian Windhorst of ESPN saying that Zion Williamson could very well be on the block. And whenever Zion Williamson's name comes up, the Knicks usually follow shortly after that. So we'll talk about the dynamics of Zion potentially on the trade block and what that means for the New York Knicks. So plenty to get to on this podcast. Again, my guy, Tommy Beer, joins me as always. Tommy, how are you feeling?
Always something. A random Wednesday in the association, the middle of June, finals over, a couple weeks away from the draft and in free agency. Yep. And then we get a Bradley Beal bomb via Woj. So plenty to discuss, but let's begin with giving some flowers to Mr. Jokic.
Let's do it. So again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, an Audacy WFAN original, a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to give us a comment, a review on those podcasts, on those podcast platforms as well, so we can give a shout out to you guys. So make sure you review those podcasts. Give us 5 stars, hopefully, if you're enjoying the show, and check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the Audacy Sports channel and the WFAN channel. We post not just the full episodes of the podcast, but also segments from the show. So once again, give us a like, give us a comment on there, so we can read your feedback and shout out you guys for supporting us. So let's get right to it. So Denver Nuggets are NBA champions for the first time in franchise history. The Nuggets closed out the Miami Heat 94-89 in Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Nikola Jokic was awarded Finals MVP. He finished the postseason leading all players in total points, total rebounds, and total assists. So an absolute dominant performance from Nikola Jokic, the 2-time MVP for the regular season, now the Finals MVP for this NBA Finals in 2023. Now, the Nuggets have a strong team, clearly, having won this title. They come into next season as the betting odd favorites to repeat as champions as well. They're plus 475 coming into next season. You wonder where the Knicks may be after what they did this season and some of the rumors we're hearing about the offseason. How does Vegas see the Knicks right now? Currently 15th in the odds for NBA championship for next season. Knicks right now, you can get them at plus 4,000. So interesting note there. We will talk about the Knicks in a second from that regard. But first, Tommy, on the Nuggets. Why were they able to capture this championship this season?
Yeah, first and foremost is it starts with the center, starts with Nikola Jokic, who was flat out dominant. You mentioned first player in NBA history to lead the all postseason players in points, rebounds, and assists. I mean, you look at the game log, you look at the numbers, they really are mind-blowing. Average 30 points, 14 rebounds in the finals, shot 58% from the floor. Postseason just missed. He was a couple of assists shy from averaging a 30-point triple-double. Over in the postseason, scored 600 points on 414 field goal attempts. Had a higher 3-point percentage than Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and several other, Klay Thompson, just elite shooters. Obviously didn't have the same volume as those guys, but knocked down 3-pointers enough to stretch the defense when needed to. Really can't say enough about Jokic. A lot of folks, I'm sure, had to watch kind of through clenched fists that had referred to him as a stat patter and not worthy of being considered an all-time great. Jokic made a lot of folks eat their words over the past 2 months. So credit to Jokic. And obviously, he's not the only one. Jamal Murray played at an incredibly high level. Really, really, obviously averaging 10 assists. Just the fourth player in NBA history to average 20 points and 10 assists in the NBA Finals. Other three are Jordan, Magic, and LeBron. So those are pretty decent names. And obviously, he and Jokic are the first pair of teammates to average 25, 5, and 5. Just a phenomenal run by the Nuggets, who were really the best team in the NBA from the very start of the season to the final day of the 2022-23 season. So credit to the Nuggets.
Yeah, I mean, the Nuggets in their success obviously starts and ends with Nikola Jokic, another just spectacular end to another spectacular season for him. This one time ending with the ultimate prize, a championship. And it's funny with these guys because, like, I don't know. I think sometimes we kind of got, because of the Jordan era, I think we're kind of lost in the sauce with some of these great players and like refusing to acknowledge their greatness before they win a championship, because there's this concept that maybe these guys will end up like Patrick Ewing and Charles Barkley and Karl Malone and John Stockton, which, by the way, not a bad place to be if you end up like one of those guys. Yeah. But I think because we saw for a long stretch of time, all-time great players end up ringless, like there's this weird kind of like we can't actually celebrate these great players who are clearly inevitably going to win a championship. And this concept that these guys may actually never win a championship, so therefore I can kind of make a hot take and say, hey, this guy actually isn't all that great, because they lived in a world where there were great players who actually didn't win championships, and then all those same people who will bash Barkley and bash Ewing and bash Malone and bash Stockton for not winning championships. And it's silly to me because like we're so beyond that era. Like now all the great players win championships at some point, pretty much. Think about them, like LeBron, Wade, Duncan, KG, Paul Pierce, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry. I keep going. I mean, Kawhi Leonard. Like, everybody wins championships at this point in time. There are no dynasties anymore. So you're going to see these great guys eventually get over the hump. So I was happy to see Jokic get off the hump and make those detractors, like you said, eat those words, because this was just inevitable. It was like, the hot takes on Jokic were just going to run out of time at a certain point, and it felt like this was that time. He showed why he is the best player in the NBA, the most dominant player in the NBA. And I think what was, maybe most surprising for a lot of people was how effective he was defensively in this series. Opponents shot only 39% in the field in the finals against him. That's akin to what Giannis did in 2021 for the Milwaukee Bucks against the Phoenix Suns. I mean, I can't count. He had 1 million deflections this series. I can't count on two hands how many deflections he had and how many turnovers he caused with his defense. So you had the defensive impact he had to go along with all the stuff he does on the glass and his offensive impact. And you got the best player in the world, and he showed that. So credit to Jokic, and like you said, credit to Jamal Murray. I mean, he's one of my favorite players in the NBA. He's been for a while now, and to think about his story going back from the knee injury, him wondering if the team was going to give up on him, and to get to that point, it was inspiring. And I saw Odell Beckham talk about it today. I think earlier today, talking about he was inspired by what he saw from Jamal Murray in these playoffs. I think it was inspiring for a lot of people. So that duo really looks like a fun duo that I hope we get to watch for a long time. It feels like maybe this is the remaking of Stockton and Malone without Michael Jordan to kind of stop them from winning championships. Like, this might be the next great, point guard, big man combo.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point you make as far as defense is concerned. And a lot of that had to do with, folks. And listen, a lot of people don't have the time. If you work a job,
right.
9 to 5 on the East Coast, you don't have time to watch Nuggets games. And you got a kid and you got a dog and you got to go to check in on your parents and hang out with your friends. Like, you don't have time to watch all the Nuggets games. So a lot of, but the issue is a lot of, casual fans get their, are informed by people that should, if
should know, right?
If your job is to cover the NBA, then you have to should be required to watch it. So all the folks bashing, and the numbers were there. The advanced analytics needed when he was on the floor. The Nuggets were a very good defensive team, but he didn't average a lot of blocks, and there weren't a lot of Instagram highlights of him, jumping over guys' back, and he just fundamentally sound. He boxed out. He was positioned correctly, understood what play the other team was going to run by doing advanced research. Part of that's credit to the coaching staff that prepared the team, and he took he took pride on that end of the floor. He wasn't a guy that didn't give effort. He tried hard, and all those things in totality. Also, his offensive dominance, which wears you out on the other end of the floor, led to the Nuggets being a good team on the defensive end and him being effective defensive player. Again, some of the counting stats may not necessarily reflect that. The highlight plays may not necessarily be there, but at the end of the day, his team won and his team played well. And part of it was because of what he did defensively. I'd like to say, this will be a wake-up call for the hot take artists, but you and I both know that that's not the case, and that's for a myriad of other reasons. Basically because that hot takes are required in order to feed the beast. But the one thing that EJ and I try to pride ourselves on is we try to be a little bit of a hot take free zone. And we'll try to continue to do that going forward. But long story short, we're not going to say anything that hasn't already been said. It's good to see Jokic get his flowers, and also the way he handled it, I thought was really classy, making sure he shook everybody's hand. So credit to Jokic and the Nuggets, and well deserved.
Yeah, it was funny because he got a lot, he didn't get heat for it, but people were kind of like, that was weird. Like, why? And I'm actually surprised more guys don't do that, after winning a championship. And I think we've seen some guys kind of make sure they go and get to guys before they just run off and celebrate. But yeah, I thought that was classy. I like that he went and tried to, give everybody, show everybody love, especially that team, because there have been some harsh words between those two teams, not in these finals, but in past seasons because of the issue with him and Morris. And so, I actually thought that was classy of him and classy of the Heat. They're classy organizations, as much as a Knicks fan, I can't stand them. Classy for the Heat as well. They were classy throughout this entire series, except for Jimmy Butler, which is a whole nother story. Not about the Nuggets, but about the Hall of Fame. But yeah, and then also shout out to the roster they put together. I mean, Calvin Booth really did a phenomenal job because he inherited, and of course he was on the staff, but he inherited a nice nucleus that Connolly put together. And then Connolly left to Minnesota, and he made some moves in the margins that really put them over the top. I mean, the KCP trade was pure highway robbery. I still don't understand what Washington was thinking of making that trade. And then signing Bruce Brown, a guy who, they got off the scrap heap, a guy that the Nets decided, couldn't play for them. And was one of the reasons why they were losing. And look, if you're playing a 6'4" guy at power forward, he's probably not going to be all that effective. That's how the Nets were using him. You see him play for the Nuggets, you realize this guy's got some game. He can handle, he can shoot. It kind of didn't make sense how he had been used. So credit to the front office as well. Of course, everybody knows how much of Mike Malone, so I don't even got to go into how much of a great job he did. He's one of the best coaches in the NBA. Proved that as well. So Nuggets come in next season right now as the betting favorites. Do you buy that?
Just real quick, because you mentioned Tim Connolly, I hadn't heard really, his name mentioned. How about Tim Connolly spends a decade building up the Nuggets, kind of from scratch.
Yeah.
Leaves them right before they win a championship and leaves to make arguably the worst trade in NBA history. Whether that was A-Rod pulling the strings or whatever the case might be. That's going to go down on his resume. And he has to, now he's got Rudy Gobert, no draft picks, and has to watch Jokic and Murray, guys that he drafted raise a.
Yeah. Sometimes that promotion isn't what you think it is. He wanted to be a president. He wanted all the power, and Stan Kroenke could be Stan Kroenke. He wasn't trying to give him all that money and that power. And now, I you're right. I think a lot of people are not going to remember that he built the nucleus of this team. They're going to remember him now for being the guy who made the biggest blunder in recent NBA history, which is a crazy turn of events for him.
To answer your question, I think the Nuggets have the belt right now, and until you take the strap from them, they deserve to be the odds-on favorite. I could definitely make an argument that the Bucks could be co-favorites, or
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd have them right underneath the Nuggets. But considering the Bucks just lost in the first round and the Nuggets are champions, it's difficult. And plus we found out Middleton had surgery. Is he ever going to be the same player that he was during the championship season? Because he's obviously a major catalyst. Along with Giannis and Drew Holiday. I think only has 1 year left on his contract and a player option, so they got to figure out there. So it'll be interesting. I'd love to see a Bucks Nuggets. I likely pick that as my finals matchup. 3 months from now when we do our preseason predictions. But yeah, I think it's fair to install the Nuggets as preseason favorites.
I would as well. I mean, I think that there's a lot of teams. It feels like a lot of these contenders got a lot of soul searching to do this offseason. Like, unlike other years where, contenders, you lose in the playoffs, okay, maybe make one move here or there and whatever. It just feels like all these other teams besides the Nuggets are staring at their rosters being like, we don't do it next year. Like, what's going to happen? I mean, Philly, Boston, in terms of what do you do with Jaylen Brown? They decided to keep the coach, which is was that the right move? They hired Charles Lee from Milwaukee to be their top assistant. He has been one of the hot coaching names all throughout the NBA as an assistant to be a next head coach. Is that the guy that's kind of now maybe the coaching waiting for when Mazzulla screws up? The Bucks, as you mentioned, older roster. Is Brook Lopez a free agent, I believe, this year? Isn't that something they got to deal with too? Brook Lopez a free agent. And then go to the West. Don't even start with John Moran in Memphis. The Warriors, where are they going to do? How are they going to retool? The Lakers, how are they going to retool? It just feels like these teams maybe end up having good records next season, but it just feels like these teams are in a little bit of a weird situation where if you're the Nuggets, I think you feel like as long as we're healthy, we could beat anybody. I think that may be the only thing you worry about. Say, hey, do we have to knock on wood and hope that, Porter doesn't have a back thing or Murray doesn't have a knee thing next year? That's probably maybe the only thing you think about, but you're not looking at your roster being like, oh, we're in some dire straits here, or this is a one and done deal. I think you look at it and say, okay, maybe we lose Bruce Brown. We find another guy to replace him. Otherwise, let's run it back.
100%. I mean, their key cogs are all under contract for not just next year, but the year after that. You mentioned while other teams are going to, kind of be dealing with continuity and trying to figure things out, they'll have their pieces in place. And you mentioned Porter. How about the fact that Jokic and Murray were so good in the finals that Porter shot 33% from the floor and 4 of 28 from behind the arc, and they still dominated the Heat, a very good Heat team. So, if they get anything from Porter in the final, I shouldn't say that. He did contribute.
Last two games, he found a way to contribute. Yeah,
he found it, but he was invisible there for stretches, and obviously couldn't knock down shots. It never has been a great defender, but at least did play with some effort on the defensive end. So yeah, Bruce Brown would obviously be a piece they'd like to retain. But I'm just looking ahead, this could be the start of something special for Denver.
And when we look at the finals odds for Denver being at 475, the Knicks at 15th among all NBA teams at 4,000. I don't know. That feels a little low to me. I'm not saying they should be in the top 5, but I'm thinking about maybe dropping some dimes on that bet, because I'm like 15. I don't know. Now it's hard to say that necessarily Vegas is saying the Knicks are the 15th best team in the NBA. Right. But you could kind of look at that and say, look, this is a team that finished in the top 8 in terms of how the season ended. They were one of the last 8 teams. And here for the betting odds, they're looking at plus 4,000. Do you read anything into that? Are they anticipating a Randall trade that maybe takes them 1 step back, 2 steps forward? What? I was a little surprised at how low they came in.
Yeah,
that's because it's New York. I think you would think people would run to say, "Oh, Knicks had a great season. Let's put money down."
Yeah, I think, but Vegas is smart enough to understand. I think their thinking is that the Knicks exceeded expectations,
right.
Whereas the Lakers failed to kind of reach their plateau, and the Lakers team obviously the second half. That being said, I do think that I was surprised the Knicks are 15th. Could you make a case that 8, that 5 teams are better odds than Knicks? Absolutely. Could you make a case that 8 teams are better? I guess so, sure. Because you make a case that 10, now you're starting to stretch it. I don't think there are 14 teams that you could make a legitimate argument. It's certainly that I wouldn't put money on that have a better chance to win a championship, especially considering the fact, as you mentioned, so much is up in the air right now. We're going to talk about Bradley Beal. He's a name that'll be bandied about. Is Joel Embiid definitely going to stay in Philadelphia? I assume so. But as we know, anything can happen. What happens with Chris Paul? What happens with Karl Anthony Towns? What happens with Zach LaVine? What happens with DeMar DeRozan? We go on. What happens with James Harden? We could go on and on and on. You assume one of those guys will go to one of these top 5-6 teams. These superstar teams will kind of consolidate. The Shams report indicated Miami is the front runner for Bradley Beal. So we'll see. That being said, again, to your point, with the Knicks odds as low as they are, I'd be willing to throw down some money in case the Knicks swing a blockbuster for an Embiid. I don't think they should trade for Beal, but somewhere along those lines, and we'll discuss that in a second. But again, there's with the Knicks you talk about those guys that are up for grabs now, and there will be another player or two that demands a trade, on a random Tuesday in August as opposed to July. And the Knicks, as we've talked about before, are in terrific position in terms of draft capital, salary cap flexibility, and salaries that they can match. Good players on very good team-friendly contracts, mid-tier contracts, expiring contracts, all the stuff that you need to make a big trade. The Knicks have. So for that reason, if we on opening day you could and nothing, the league's kind of settled a little bit, then you could make more of a realistic argument that the Knicks aren't legit championship contenders. But right now, if you're just throwing darts and rolling the dice, the Knicks have a decent chance to do some interesting stuff this offseason.
I agree. And you look at these teams: Nuggets, Celtics, Bucks, Suns, Lakers, Warriors, Sixers, Clippers, Heat, Grizzlies, Mavericks, Kings, Cavaliers, Pelicans, all ahead of the Knicks. Now, that Pelicans thing, let's see how long that lasts by the time we get to the NBA draft, given all these rumors. But, I mean, that's a lot of teams. There's a lot of good teams. Some of them not that good. Mavericks, not very good at all. But that's a lot of teams in there to put ahead of the Knicks. So very interesting there. But shout out to the Denver Nuggets. They did their thing winning this NBA championship. So let's get on to Bradley Beal, because this has become a thing that is unfolding as we speak. So, you have the Adrian Wojnarowski report that happened just today that the Wizards are working with Bradley Beal, who has a no trade clause on his contract, to see if he should be somebody. It should be that is to see if they could find a place for him to be traded to. Bradley Beal, of course, a 3-time All-Star, a guy who's accomplished a lot in this league regarding individual accolades, not so much team accolades. He's been stuck in Washington, a bad situation for most of his career. It seems like the Wizards are saying at this point in time, if/when, because they're going to decide this, when they decide to rebuild this thing, they're going to try to ship him out, and they are talking to his representatives to figure out a place for him. And then you had Alan Hahn, who is MSG analyst, does the pregame for the Knicks. I thought it was interesting because he was on ESPN's Get Up. And before Woj comes with this stuff today, and Shams is also piggybacking these reports today about Bradley Beal, he comes out yesterday and says that the Knicks should be a team that goes after Bradley Beal, and that pairing him with Jalen Brunson would take the Knicks to the next level. So now you got Bradley Beal, like I said, a 3-time All-Star who has suffered through some injury-riddled seasons the past 4 years. He failed to play more than 60 games during that period. He's also owed more than $200 million over the next 4 years, but now appears to be on his way out of DC, and at least one prominent Knicks commentator saying that the Knicks should be a team to go after him. So when I see that, Tommy, I can't help but say, okay, that's interesting to me, because is that coming from an educated guess or some kind of surmise of what the front office is thinking, or is this Alan Hahn just shooting from the hip, seeing something as he wants to see it? So I ask you, should the Knicks go after Bradley Beal?
No. Long story short, there's 207 million reasons why the Knicks should avoid, and then for the next 4 years of Bradley Beal's contract, 46.7 million he'll make next year. Year after that, 50.2 million. $53.6 million, and then at 2026-27, when Bradley Beal, I believe, will be 34 years old during that season, will make over $57 million. Again, as something we've talked about quite often, the new CBA, with what's called the second apron, or it's going to be referred to as a lead apron, it basically puts you over the tax, really limits your ability to round out the roster, and improve your team on the margins, when you exceed that threshold, and that would bump the Knicks right up against it by trading for Bradley Beal. And again, that's not even the way I like to look at when we see a big name being traded, whether it's Karl-Anthony Towns or rumors, about a guy requesting a trade, is if that player was a free agent this offseason, would you sign him to the contract he's currently signed for? So would you pay $207 million for the next 4 years, Bradley Beal? Some teams would, and would be a decent investment. I personally, a guy that was never a great defender, on the wrong side of 30, has played for a team that hasn't won more than 35 games in the last 4 years. Has seen his efficiency decline a little bit, has seen the scoring average dip a little bit. There's just not a lot there in the right situation. Obviously, the injury history is not overly encouraging. In the right situation, if you have LeBron and AD, or if you have Jimmy Butler and Bam, and you think you're one piece away from a title team within the next couple of years, and that's kind of your window, and you have some cap that you want to send out, then that's something that you might be comfortable doing. For me personally, from the Knicks standpoint, that's not a contract I'm comfortable with. Now, that's a question if he was a free agent. Now you're talking about trading him. Also, keep in mind he has a 50% trade kicker. He's one of the very few players in the NBA with a no trade clause, so the Knicks would have to take back that trade kicker amount. And you'd have to send out assets, presumably, first round draft picks, IQ, OB, whatever that case might be. I'm sure the Wizards are going to ask for that type of stuff initially. Hopefully somebody bites. Again, for me, if the Wizards were potentially sending back, draft capital, and then you to entice to get off that books and kickstart the rebuild, then that's something I'd look at. But I'm not willing to give up valuable assets for the right to overplay a 30-year-old Bradley Beal, me personally.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right on the right track here. I don't want Bradley Beal on the New York Knicks. Bradley Beal, to me, is like a very interesting NBA figure. I think his career arc, and maybe it'll be different if he ends up landing on a title contender. But to me, he's like this generation's World B. Free, like a guy who scored a lot of points, and it didn't really make any impact on the NBA regarding how many points he was scoring. Like, he made the All-Star game once for World B. Free. Beals made it 3 times. Good player. Everybody knows the guy is an offensive scorer, a guy who can definitely put the ball in the hole. But like you said, undersized. I don't like the fit with him and Brunson, because now you're talking about 2 undersized guards. Neither of them can defend. We saw what happened when the Knicks put a backcourt mate next to Brunson who couldn't defend in Fournier, and that was an absolute disaster defensively. So you're gonna do that again? I don't think that would make sense. Offensively, you score, I think, but I don't know. Beal is a guy who's a little ball dominant. So, like, is he the great fit next to Brunson? Now, can he adjust his game? Maybe be a little bit more of a spot-up shooter. Guys, maybe more off-ball guy, I guess. But he's really good in pick and roll. Like, I think that it's actually underrated how much of a threat he is playing in that pick and roll style. It was one of the reasons why him and John Wall kind of clashed a little bit, because the Wizards' offense was actually better when they were running their offensive Beal at certain points than Wall. So am I going to take Brunson and move him off the ball a bunch? I don't really want to do that either. So I don't like the fit. And that goes beyond even just talking about the money, and the injuries. Beal's been a guy who's been injury prone. Like you said, he's north of 30. And we were, of course, we have a text chain like most shows here. And like I sent you guys in the text chain when we talked about this, those super max deals for guys that are non-superstars are poison pills. Like, Bradley Beal's a good player. Like, in a vacuum, if things were a little different, could you convince me that maybe Knicks go after him? Maybe. Right. I still have those issues with the defense, all that stuff. But once you bring in, I got to pay him $207 million over the next 4 years, and the player option for the last year, which is at $57 million, like, then the conversation ends. Like, I don't know why the teams sign these guys to these contracts. Like, teams are so afraid now of guys leaving that they end up kind of positioning themselves and putting them backing themselves in the corners where now it's gonna be hard to get rid of these guys, especially after what happened with Rudy Gobert. Now every team can look at that and say, I don't want to be the next, Minnesota Timberwolves trading for a guy, giving up $1 million assets for a guy with a terrible contract.
Well, I think the thinking from Washington's point of view is if they in other words, if they let him sign elsewhere last summer, they wouldn't have been able to use that cap space to sign a comparable player. So now the thinking is, at the time, we'll sign him to this contract. Worst case scenario, he demands a trade in 12 months, and then we'll trade him for a bunch of first-round picks. They may only get one first-round pick.
Right.
They may only get one decent young player and some cap filler, but at least they get something as opposed to letting a guy walk for free. You could argue maybe a sign and trade would have been a more viable option. So I think that's kind of where the Wizards were coming from. But yes, to your point, and again, something we've talked about again, the Knicks were a good offensive team last year, third in the NBA in offensive rating. And they were 19th in the NBA in defensive rating. How does this move if it improves them offensively? And no doubt, again, fans, I shouldn't say fans. Folks sometimes, think, okay, this guy's a great scorer. So if you the object of the game is to score points, how can it not improve your team? It's because those shots take away from other shots. Are they more efficient shots? Do they prevent the other team from scoring more? Because again, the object of the game is not just to score more points; it's to score more points than your opponent. So if your opponent, if you give up more points on the other end of the floor, the net return may not be positive. So if you're asking me who I'd rather have, OG Anunoby or Bradley Beal, for the Knicks, it's not even a question. You'd rather have that 3-and-D wing, who's obviously not as good an offensive player as Anunoby, but he's top 10. He's an All-NBA defender, was a second-team All-NBA, ahead of guys like Anthony Davis and Giannis Antetokounmpo from the forward position. And you look at the guys he can guard. Beal can't do that same thing. And then you talk about the usage rate, assuming they don't send out valuable assets, which would mean they would keep both Randall and Barrett. Maybe they would consider trading one of those. I'm not sure, but maybe it's just cap filler and a draft pick or two. Again, I wouldn't do any of the above. But let's say they can keep their valuable assets, what they deem valuable assets. Obviously, Barrett and Randall among them. Then how are you going to split up shots between Bradley Beal, Jalen Brunson, R.J. Barrett, and Julius Randle? Not to mention you got IQ and Josh Hart. You're going to re-sign him. So there's all for all those reasons. Again, that doesn't mean that Bradley Beal's a bad basketball player. It just means for the Knicks, especially at this stage of their development, all their young guys, all their young core, they've done a really good job of avoiding kind of those cap crippling contracts. In order for me to take on one of those, I need it to be a stud type player, an Embiid type player. Those I'm willing to kind of give up the farm for and risk that contract. But the ironic part is that Embiid's contract is actually more team friendly than Beal. A lot of it has to do with when these deals are signed. But so when you factor in defensive issues, lack of success with Bradley Beal on the last few years of his career, his lack of proven playoff credentials, and then the cherry on the top, that $200 million, hard pass for me.
Yeah, and it's funny, shout out to the people watching us on YouTube. Like, I'm looking at this lower third that we have for this video. Shout out to Alan Hahn, one of my favorite Knicks commentators out there right now. So shout out to him. But, says Alan Hahn thinks Beal plus Brunson could be the NBA's best backcourt. You know who else I kept hearing about having the best backcourt with Bradley Beal? I kept hearing everybody say that Wall and Beal could be the NBA's best backcourt. What did that win them? Jack. It didn't win them anything.
And those both guys in their prime.
In their prime, not injured, not making $50 million a year. This was when they were young. They were making the playoffs and couldn't win anything. So, like, okay, you had the best backcourt in the NBA, but, like, what does that mean towards actually winning? And I feel like if they got Bradley Beal next season, I feel like the Knicks' ceiling would be the same as it was this year. Like, if you're telling me what do you think they would do next season? I think they'll probably get to the second round. They compete in a hard-fought series, and they probably lose to the Bucks or Heat or Celtics. Like, that's what I would think. So, like, I'm not going to do that and then pay this guy $50 million and hope that he stays healthy for the next 4 years.
Again, if Brunson was 31 and Randall was 32 and Barrett was 29, and then you're gonna lose those guys in free agency. You're gonna have to kind of rebuild and reshuffle the deck. Like the Miami Heat, I understand them being making that makes sense. They've got Lowry's not getting any younger. Jimmy Butler's 34, 35 years old. They're probably gonna lose Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, so they have to replace those guys. So again, their window obviously is Jimmy Butler focused. So Butler doesn't have 5 years left. The Knicks, the beauty of the Knicks as currently constructed is not only are they competitive, they made it to the grade 8 this season, but they're well positioned to be in the future. In years past, the Knicks didn't have anything worth. So yeah, trade for Bradley Beal, and you can't get worse than a 17-win team anyway.
Right.
And then you have Joakim Noah's contract on the books and all this other nonsense that you didn't have a lot of maneuvering ability. Now you don't have to pick just that one lane. You can, as something we've said for weeks and months now, you can be selective in the star you want to take back. And this is not the right star that the Knicks should use those assets they've been accumulating to acquire, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, Bradley Beal, I mean, this is going to be a topic of conversation, not just in Knicks world, but in the NBA world. He's a multiple-time All-Star. He's a 25-point caliber scorer, 30-point caliber scorer even a couple years ago. He almost won that scoring title. So he's going to make an impact somewhere, you would think, if he goes to a contender. But I don't think it makes sense for the Knicks. So speaking of guys in other lanes maybe the Knicks can pursue, the Zion Williamson era in NOLA could be coming to an end. So you had Shams Charania reporting that the Pelicans are pursuing a trade in hopes of drafting G League Ignite point guard Scoot Henderson in the top 3 of this year's NBA draft, and that they are discussing internally whether they should be sending out Zion Williamson in order to make that happen. Again, Brian Windhorst also piggybacked on that reporting, saying that the Pelicans are certainly looking at what their options could be for trading Zion Williamson. And whenever Zion Williamson trade rumors or unhappiness rumors have come about, the Knicks have shortly followed after there. He wanted to be a Knick when he was in the draft in 2019. Of course, that did not happen. The Knicks lost the lottery. He talked about Madison Square Garden being his favorite place to play, New York City being one of his favorite cities in America. So the trade machine was already working as soon as these reports started coming out that Zion may be on the move. Tommy, if you were the Knicks, would you pursue Zion Williamson in this situation and get into this situation where if you're looking at Portland maybe trying to trade 3, maybe you say, hey, let's throw in our pick, let's throw in Randall, let's make this a 3-team deal, let's bring back Zion, because how healthy can Zion be really to help Dame Lillard win a championship? Like, should the Knicks get involved with this potential trade rumors?
Oh, man, EJ, like there's times I'm jealous of sports executives. They make all this money and get the, and have get a place at the table of such important decisions. And I'd like to think I'm knowledgeable about sports. This is one of those situations where I think the Pels should probably trade Zion, but I don't think I'd have the stomach to trade him. If gun to my head, I'd probably bet against him, fulfilling his potential. But there are very few players in the NBA that have MVP potential. When he's healthy, he is a top 5 athlete, talent, a combination of what he can do on a basketball floor. A lot of people can't do. He hasn't been able to do it more than 2 months at a time. He hasn't been able to do it consistently, whether that's his fault or his body's fault or sliding into girls' DMs, whatever. There's a lot of red flags there, and there's a lot of stuff that you have to be worried about if you're a Pelicans fan, if you're a Pelicans, in Pelicans management, if you're a team that's considering trading for him. I'm sure there's a lot of executives doing a lot of digging because these guys they don't mess around in these professional sports leagues. They know exactly. Yeah. They have a better sense of just what the buzz is on Twitter. Like they get to the bottom of stuff. But again, the Browns gave up an untold amount of assets for Deshaun Watson and signed the richest contract in NFL history. If you are talented enough, a team will give you a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance and a fifth chance. When I want my team to be the team that gives, what are we on, a second, third chance now in terms of injuries and red flags? Because I'm not in love with Randall, I could be talked into it. I could consider it. I'd like the idea of just it would just be so interesting to see kind of how he would fit in alongside, the leadership kind of in a with Brunson led locker room and under Tibbs and all that stuff. So I wouldn't be dead set against it. But again, that's, my job's not on the line, so I can just kind of do it for goofs. I don't know. I'd really have to sit down, think hard. I'd have to think about what they'd give up. I'd have to think about what they'd give back. But I'm really on the fence when it comes to Zion. I don't know which way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. This is one of the hardest decisions I think probably an organization will have to sit through in terms of the Pelicans. And I think it'll be equally hard for these teams who see a supernova talent out there who I think can be had probably. But what will it cost you? Will he ever play at that supernova talent level for you on a consistent basis? And what other headaches may come with him if you bring him into your organization? So, like, that's funny. I was talking to my brother a couple of nights ago, and I was looking at the Zion Williamson situation, and it's different because of the injury reasons, really. But to me, he kind of reminds me of like Chris Webber's early career in the NBA. Like, it's one of those things where if I'm the Pelicans and say, look, he may go somewhere else and be an MVP candidate, it just ain't gonna be here.
Right.
And that's a decision that like the Wizards / Bullets and the Warriors had to come to, and it wasn't necessarily or everything wasn't all their fault. A lot of it was the immaturity of the actual player himself. But sometimes you just gotta know, like, is there any scenario where like this thing just doesn't continue to kind of snowball and get worse and worse, and like it just might not work out, and he may go somewhere else and be great, but you may just have to live with that and hope you can make the best of whatever kind of shrapnel you get coming back for you.
And you could tell yourself that even if he goes on to fulfill his potential elsewhere, you can kind of reason to yourself, it just wasn't going to happen here for whatever reason. Like he needed to go somewhere else and get a fresh start and get a kick in the pants and realize nothing's guaranteed, etc. But yeah, it's a scary scenario one with the other. And the other thing the Pels have to ask themselves, some Pels fans, if they trade him, are going to say, why did you sell low? He's coming off an injury-prone year, and you let him get healthy and then trade him. Is this not what the Pels got to ask themselves? Is there another level of, in other words, if he gets hurt again, how much further, if you can get 83% of, whatever Zion was 100%, at the 12 months ago, you can get 85% now. Can you, maybe only get 70% 6 months from now, and then a year from now, maybe only get 40%, because another baby mom. Just there's a lot. Of, it's just a lot of stuff out there that can scare you. And then the flip side is he comes in healthy and he can average 27, 9, and 5 for 2 months. So it's a difficult decision.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're looking at the salary you got for the next 5 years. You just signed this extension that kicks in this year. 33 million this year, 36 million the year after that, 38 million, 41 million, 44 million. I mean, that's a gamble, but if he's a great player, I mean, it's not the craziest.
I'm pretty sure
not Bradley Beal numbers.
I'm pretty sure there are protections, injury in games.
Yes, they are.
The first Embiid contract, there are protections on there. So
yes, exactly. So I mean, if he doesn't do what he's capable of, I think the most he'll get, I think, is 193 out of that, 250 million that he would get. So, like, I look, if I was the Knicks, you got to call. You got to see. 100%. You got to call. You got to say, hey, what is out there? Because you have Julius Randle, who I'm not trying to give him away for anybody, but like we kind of know what you're getting from him. The best you'll get is a maybe moody, but probably really impactful and effective regular season, and a player who in the postseason is completely unreliable.
Yes.
So given where he is and who that player is, you're looking at not a championship. Maybe second round, maybe you can find a way in the conference finals, but it's hard to think that your second best player could be that poor in the postseason. You get all the way to a championship. So you have to ask yourself, hey, is this the kind of a good move to kind of maybe reset our clock a little bit? Like the Knicks are a young team, but maybe it feels like, hey, like given where Brunson's age is and his contract is, that they kind of have to get this thing done now, which is why you're hearing, hey, maybe you go after Bradley Beal, maybe you go after Zach LaVine. Maybe this kind of resets your situation. We say, hey, this is a younger guy that you're bringing in. Okay, maybe we will have to pay Brunson $40 million a year in a couple of years, but we have now, another 22-year-old to go with RJ Barrett and these other guys, and these guys will continue to develop. And maybe Brunson's a slight overpay in a couple of years, but we got other guys who are now entering the prime of their career, and now your team looks different. Maybe you're not looking at trying to win the championship in the next 2-3 years. Maybe you're saying, hey, our window in the next 6-7 years may be a little better.
While still being competitive.
And you should still be a good team, knock on wood, if Zion stays healthy. And that's probably really the main thing is for me is the health.
Agreed. The other stuff is a little bit concerning. The main question with that is the injury. If the guy can't play, and whether he's motivated enough, whether he just, that is the primary concern.
And you made a one point you made too about the injuries. I think was good, talking about like, do you trade him now so that you don't have worse things to deal with? Like, remember, like this injury he dealt with, like, this wasn't some like debilitating thing that you would think that's gonna derail his career. Like, he had a hamstring injury and he couldn't recover, and like the thought behind it is, well, soft tissue injury, not in the greatest shape. Like, could your poor recovery be to the fact that you're not taking care of your body? It wasn't he tore his ACL or he had a leg fracture, Achilles, but you don't know. Like, there's no reason, unless Zion doesn't take his body and his job seriously, that he shouldn't go back to being Zion Williamson. So, like, you don't want to, if you're the Pelicans, say, well, you know what, like, he had a soft tissue injury, like, we'll just try to motivate him again, and he'll come back next year. The next year, he does blow out a knee, and God forbid, or does have some debilitating thing. Now you can't give him away. So that's something I think the Pelicans will have to wrestle as well, and it's something that, that if you're the Knicks or you're any team that's looking to trade for Zion, you may tell yourself, hey, like, yes, he's had these injuries, but he hasn't really had anything yet that would make you super scared that he can't play moving forward. Like, and maybe this is the time now to say, hey, if we can just get him to just commit, maybe this will be the right place for him. I actually think also, I think what I've learned about Zion in the last 4 years, however many years it's been in the NBA, 4, I guess, I think he benefited more from playing next to RJ Barrett in college than I think anybody ever realized, because RJ was the number one guy coming out of high school. RJ was the guy seen as the quote-unquote Maple Mamba. And Zion had a lot of hype, obviously, coming into that Duke season. I'm talking about once we got to the NBA draft and stuff. But he was seen almost more as like a social media star than he was even like the best player coming into that Duke class. And RJ took all the hits, took all the criticism, and as my brother noted, took a lot of late shots in those games that they won, that they lost. Like, he was a closer in a lot of those games. Like, a lot of that stuff, and we talk about RJ's maturity and how it's been a benefit to his NBA career so far. A lot of those arrows, so to speak, and a lot of that responsibility really was never on Zion. Zion can just go out there and catch alley-oops and just be a physical freak. I kind of wonder if you put him back with RJ Barrett, who's still shown to be a really mature young guy, a really good leader at just 22 years old. Maybe that's the exact right guy to put him next to, along with a guy like Jalen Brunson.
The other thing I was thinking from the Duke days is how much did he benefit from the structure under Coach K? That's a tightly run. We can knock Coach K for a million things, but they don't mess around in terms of meetings and professionalism of
it's like a pro team.
100%. And one has to wonder, had Zion been drafted by Miami and they had him on a weight, you don't weigh under this amount, then you don't get paid and you can't practice that day.
Right.
But to your point, like, Zion was more of like a Mac McClung, Seventh Woods type internet sensation guy. What really impressed everybody was how well-rounded his game was once he kind of came to Duke and played well early on.
Yeah, he exceeded expectations in that freshman year.
100%.
Like, he was the third best player in the class. People thought Reddish and RJ were better than him. He came in as the third guy.
Yep.
You're right. And then he came in and he was an absolute marvel. So you're definitely right about that. I think you're right also about the structure. Like, I think David Griffin's been an overrated executive for a long time. So, and I don't necessarily blame everything on him with this, but I felt like he set a bad tone the minute Zion got there. Like, I think Zion gets there, and the first thing he's saying is, this is Drew Holiday's team. It seemed like they just were ready to just absolve Zion of any responsibility. Maybe in one sense, maybe trying to recreate what Duke atmosphere was to some degree. But I actually think it sent a bad message. To me, they ran that team like a summer camp. It was, you don't have to play here. We're gonna sit you out in summer league. We're gonna do this. It was just so much coddling to start an NBA career. It's just, you don't see that for rookies. Like, he was treated like he was a 33-year-old vet who they were trying to keep on ice and keep him fresh for the playoffs. It didn't make any sense how they coached him, how Alvin Gentry in that rookie year coached him, and how they talked about him. And so it's hard to start like that and then become a hard ass like his third year in the league. Like, it's not going to compute. It's not going to make sense to him. So I just didn't understand how they handled that. But the Zion Williamson stuff, I think, will be interesting. I think if he does get traded, I think you will hear stuff about the Knicks poking around. So
Definitely.
Should-
Again, I don't know if they do it, but they'll be in the conversation 100%.
Exactly. So that's going to do it for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. Myself, EJ, Tommy Beer. Tommy, let people know they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. Again, thank you guys so much for checking us out. First of all, also be sure if you're listening to this podcast, you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you get the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. We drop, of course, twice during the off season, so we'll have more episodes next week. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel. Thank you guys again for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.